Our story begins with two young people talking about whether they have ever played a game called Dark Spirit. He says yes, because it is a masterpiece that is said to be among the most difficult games. Oh, why doesn't Korea make stuff like that? Super dark and difficult games. Instead of talking, why don't we create the game itself? And what do you mean, does he know how to play games? Who said we would do it? Let's just do some planning and create the concepts, the world map, the monsters, the traps. Since we're not actually doing it, we don't have to get caught up in anything. Don't you think it's fun? Man, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. And that's why I liked it. Let's do it then. Really? Then let's start with the title. Is there anything really good out there? Okay, it's time to write in English. Can he read this? At that time, the protagonist couldn't even imagine that the game he created to have fun with a friend in high school would average. But how about this? Shadow of Dungeons, people will like it, so that's it. Then it would become a monster that would destroy the entire world. So we'll see that our protagonist works building houses. He's digging and building every day, as if he were an ant. Not so much. Unlike ants, this house isn't his, because he doesn't have money in this capitalist society. Whoever doesn't have money is even weaker than ants. He didn't want to live like a loser, so he became an adult faster than the others, an old man. You ask him to take a break and he says it's okay. The only thing he could believe in was his own body, so he suffered from pain from hard work. One of the people calls the protagonist and says that they found out that he managed to finance a house and when was he going to move in. The protagonist smiles and says it will probably be this coming weekend. And seriously, how long has he been working here? Has he already paid the down payment? He's been working for about 5 years, right? Yes, 5 years and 4 months. Wow, that's amazing. He spent all this time saving up to buy a house. It's not like that. It's small and only has 2 bedrooms. Still, the price must have been high. He must have worked a lot. Which is not the point. This society is cruel to people without money. It was time to end the small talk and get back to work. Right, he can see Namsam from the terrace where he lives. In that sunset, he already realizes that it's a tight place and, damn, someone says welcome to him. He left work early today. He lives with his little sister and, why isn't he home? There are no classes, it's exam week. That's why there's no class. This is rice cakes again. I bought real food for once. Get out. She was supposed to stop being annoying. At that moment, she starts laughing, saying why wouldn't he prefer her to cook? Of course, he loves the dog food. She squeezes his neck and so living there was the only thing he knew, but he can't stay in that tiny space forever with his own sister. So at night, he works at a karaoke bar. Those dumplings weren't enough to make the protagonist feel full, but does he eat some noodles or something? At that moment, 2 old drunks enter the bar and say it's closing. It's time to go to karaoke for the night and everything is fine. The protagonist says welcome, and so they tell their consecrated person to bring some drops and some peanuts and call 2 young girls. The work is calmer compared to construction. In that bar, they don't offer that type of service. Sir, he's sorry, and that's what. The old man asks him to listen, because what does he mean by, he doesn't offer this type of service? That place was rubbish. It was time to go somewhere else. He says he's sorry, but he really can't do anything. Sometimes it's mentally exhausting for the clients. They play different roles on the protagonist's head, who gets angry. You say he's trying to fool you because he can't do anything. He's no good for anything. That bastard, he's laughing at him and thinks he's really a clown. That's enough. It's time to go. The other friend says that he's drunk. He should understand, but the drunk man shouts to understand what. Then the protagonist picks up a piece of paper and, completely irritated, he starts putting them together one by one, and soon after that he leaves. On the street next to the house, the night view of the city is full of colorful lights. giving off a feeling of comfort. If he doesn't move, he won't be able to see this anymore. The situation is a little disappointing, but then, when he gets home, after his shower, he starts to sigh. At that moment, he realizes that he had a pen drive on top of his computer, something that he says, by the way, was time to do the beta test of that game. So we go to the past. It is a game that is being developed by the very company that wanted him to try it. Well, he likes to play, but he hasn't had much time lately. He can just play whenever he wants. Try it. But why is he asking to test the moon instead of his employees? It's just that he'll understand when he tests. So, the protagonist puts a pen drive in his computer, and since it was a favor for him, he should play at least a little. Then he looks at the name of the game and gets scared. He says he knows that name and waits. It was the name they said they would make when they were kids. He actually did that talk about inventing a game in high school as a joke. It looks cool, let's see what it's capable of. Just after a few minutes of play, the protagonist has already died. The continue screen appears shortly afterwards. He wonders what that was, as he only took one hit from the first monster. And why doesn't Korea make games like that? Dark and difficult, you know? It's supposed to be super difficult, isn't it? But it's very addictive. He wants to at least get to the first boss before going to sleep. The next day, the protagonist goes to work. That deafening noise starts to affect him, until his cell phone rings, and he says hi. He asks what happened, because the police called. Yes, then he says he believes so. It's obvious, except that the police say something about a financial fraud. They are investigating the extent of the owner, but T-Jun's name is on the list of transactions. If he submitted a damage report, they would update him on the progress of the investigation when they had time. The police ask if you are still listening, if you can still hear. He needs to leave early, so he tells his teammates. He prepares, and when you try to ask what happened, the protagonist is already running. Running through the city, the protagonist prepares himself. At that moment, he thinks that everything is going wrong. Even though he is tired, he continues to run in that world. He starts screaming in the night. He says that the hill he saw that day is shining brightly like any other day. He wanted them all to disappear at once, and he was cursing them. The next day, on the news, a journalist tells his companions that what simply happened was unbelievable. The city, which is a historical and tourist attraction, in just one night, simply disappeared completely. The curse that the protagonist had said became a reality. The game that our protagonist made for our school in the largest dwarven mine on the continent. A monster that I had never seen before appeared. The monsters conquered the underground with their terrifying strength, but soon became a threat to those living on the surface. Constructed entirely of ores, those monsters, unbreakable cups were their main weapons, were known as golems. The journalist was at the site of the destruction. Then he says it is Seo Myeon-chun from Obk News. He is currently at the scene of the city's great disappearance. Expert opinions are divided on how this phenomenon occurred. However, what we do know is that the government is preparing for a second disaster. And what do you mean? They notice that right behind the journalist, there is a strange hand appearing. The cameraman looks like the monster. He sees it, and when the journalist says that these viruses are strictly prohibited from accessing the area, the monster was already right behind him. He looks back, asking what the cameraman was talking about, and soon his head is cut off, and he falls to the ground dead. The cameraman gets scared, starts screaming, and runs away. Soon, several of them appear at that moment. And the protagonist's cell phone, he looks at these monsters and talks about how this could be happening. Strange creatures appear in the city while still monster entity, and the reason behind its existence remains unclear. Some internet users call it Golem, a type named after fantasy games. It is the response to damage that spreads quickly through the monster. The army successfully deployed artillery and tanks to secure a line of security at the site. And my God, lately there's only been news about those monsters. Citizens must stay within safe areas and avoid danger zones. The person saying this, in fact, was the journalist who was on the cell phone of one of the protagonist's co-workers. They were on their lunch break and talking about the news they were having lately in the world. And that wasn't good. There's a monster running around, killing people. This isn't even a movie. And it was true. The unidentified monster is very curious about what kind of monster it could be. Why is the monster so similar to what they made? And how did they create it at that time? They asked the protagonist what was happening because he was standing there thinking about something. He says it's nothing. Anyway, since they are talking about the monster, and they knew about the monster called Treasure Golem, like this, well, he knows their bodies are made of ores, right? Therefore, he may find a precious material in one of them, such as gold or diamond. What it is, this has to be fake news. Man, there are people out there who have banded together to get this treasure golem. Remember Lee? That crane. He learned that he joined a group and made a lot of money in a few days. Wow, he's thinking about getting out there and trying to catch one of them. No way. Obviously, it wasn't very dangerous. It was time to continue working well in that place. Of course, yes, this type of golem is not that easy to obtain compensation for. He is sorry to say this, but giving up would be the best choice. The story of that treasure golem. The man became very rich even though he tried and was in a group of thousands of other people. If he managed to catch one alone, he wouldn't become a millionaire. He then arrives home, and the sister soon says hi to the protagonist, looking at different sides of his body, asking if he is hurt, if he hasn't found any monsters out there. He says nothing happened. It was time for her to stay calm, continue working on the construction. At a time like these, he must just be crazy until classes stop. And don't you think it was luck? Even with all the karaoke bars closed, you still have a chance to make money. And if he encounters a monster and dies, he won't die. He wasn't supposed to talk about that. Someone calls the protagonist, asking if he was at home. Was he the owner? He soon asks if she needed anything. She says it's not urgent, but the rent for that month hasn't been paid yet. Then he's sorry, he completely forgot. As soon as the bonus arrives, it will pay out immediately. It's really good. Sometimes life takes a toll, but you don't have to sink because of it. I hope it gets better and your things. Yes, he will be careful next time. The real monster was this, the monster called poverty, which devoured the spirit itself. At night, the protagonist was lying down. He thinks about this treasure golem, and if this information is true, why among the monsters? In that game, such an entity already exists. If those monsters are real, then this situation really belongs to that game. He soon prepares himself with a pickaxe and a hammer in his hands. With this, he will at least be able to fight with the weaker ones. And the passage between the buildings leads to the danger zone. He starts walking there, even though it is prohibited. The protagonist says that when he saw it during the day, border security seemed weaker in the place he was entering. The noise starts to happen as he is walking down the alley. He is constantly asking himself if what he is doing is the right choice. But even if it is not the right choice, he has no other choice because he needs the money. At night, he sees that place completely destroyed, and several noises begin to happen. He sighs and says everything is fine. It was time to go. He soon hides behind one of the seats. One of the golems appears screaming. He sees that monster from afar and says it was there, but he calms down. He won't be able to do anything if he gets so nervous at that moment. If that monster is really like the one in the game, then it knows all the behavior patterns. As long as he doesn't screw up, he won't get hit. But what if the appearance is just a coincidence? If he really is completely different from their game, he would probably take damage and die. That's a possibility. Instead, the idea that he will behave like the monster in the game that has not yet been released is quite impossible. But this acting crazy, not knowing the difference between the game and reality, it's better to go home. But it's okay. If he runs away, will he have another chance to make a fortune? Probably not. The protagonist soon gets ready. He holds his sledgehammer very well. and thus remembers his sister calling, asking what he would do if her brother died. He soon gets ready and gives up. He will come back, it's just the money. He can start again with more caution next time. But the golem had already seen the protagonist. At that moment, they were facing each other, and he immediately got scared. There was another one who was almost trying to attack him, but blood gushed everywhere. Before the blow hits the protagonist and he sees his death screen in the past, he asks his sister if anything happened. He apologizes because he didn't do anything. It was time to go back to sleep. Wow, they didn't make it any easier. How many times has he died by the first monster that appeared? It was time to take it easy. He's starting to see a pattern after dying so many times. Generally, he starts to tell you that from top to bottom, the movements of these attacks are extremely unusual. So when he dodges while raising his arm, he predicts that the skin will slow down for half a second. And what is he doing at that moment? Before starting an attack, he calculates his own dodge. So, to avoid these attacks, he cannot dodge immediately after he raises his arm, but rather after that half a second. The protagonist ends up dodging, so attacking while he composes himself is what the protagonist does. He ends up using his sledgehammer to attack while he recovers himself, and then dodges. It worked. That game strategy worked. The monster that was standing there with blood, he wonders where it was from and looks down, predicting that his chest was cut open. He says he was sure he was dodging at that moment, and it's clear that even though the monster's movements are exactly the same as those in the games, it's still not a game. Dodge movement is different from the character's own in real life. There isn't that frame invisible. This kind of thing is natural. But now, when the monster starts to approach him, 3 quick attacks to the right he censures, and his foot ends up slipping. The protagonist ends up falling to the ground. The golem looks at him from above, and another top-down slash from the left. He quickly stands up with a clatter. And he was unable to counterattack. He stumbled and lost time. The monster hits the protagonist squarely, who screams in pain and starts coughing. He says that it was hurting a lot and his back was hurting a lot. He can't feel his own spine, and he thinks it was crushed. The nerves in the lower part of his body seem to have been cut. His body doesn't move at all. At that rate, he's going to die. When the golem steps on the protagonist, he remembers his sister. And then, he dodges and hits Gal hard on the foot. He immediately tries to get up. His back hurts a lot, but he doesn't seem to be in trouble, thanks to the iron plate that he put in his bag as a precaution. The impact was tremendous. But from the sign, he managed to hold on, but he can no longer defend himself and is also injured. Should he back off? He soon sees in the distance that there is a sign talking about natural landscapes in the city center. At that moment, even if he comes back, a nobody with no prospects for the future, in a completely vulnerable society governed by money, living forever being poor, that's what he'll be able to do in life. The golem was going to punch the protagonist, but at that moment, he says that he is very tired of being poor, and then attacks again. Everything the golem would do, at first he says it hurts, but if he stops here, they will attack. It wouldn't be worth anything, and it was time to move. Now he delivers the last blow. On the left side, he prepares and thus succeeds. However, what now? The golem holds the protagonist's face and throws it at the wall, and soon after, the pickaxe is there. He starts to fall and cough. His back was on edge. It was hurting so much. However, he got what he wanted, the fragment of corrupted flesh. He remembers when he was playing and what kind of item this is. There was even a cutscene in the game. At that moment, the character held that flesh and then he began to transform. What was that? That must be why he always died to the first monsters. He should have gone through that first event, and it's a good thing he broke it on that side. Soon after, the monster starts trying to attack the protagonist, but he prepares himself by screaming. In fact, he always came alone, risking his own life. He didn't think that this monster's movements would be the same as those in the game. He knew it was impossible to hunt these monsters he had. The reason he is there, dreaming, risking his own life. He starts to stick that piece of corrupted flesh into his arm, and just like that, his blood starts to bubble and boil. He starts to scream in pain. His eyes bulge. He doesn't know what to do at that moment. His arm starts to change color, and the monster comes at him. Because what does he really want to do in the middle of the night? If in real life, just like in the game, he will be able to obtain the golem's powers. The protagonist, at that moment, had taken all the golem's power in his arm, stuck in the head of that monster that was in front of him. Soon after, a monster begins to die, and the protagonist realizes this, but he makes one last advance, and so does the protagonist. Get ready to throw your last punch that completely destroys the monster. Falling to the ground, he begins to breathe deeply and realize what was done. He looks at his hands and can't believe it worked. He wants everyone to die. He starts screaming and wakes up. At that moment, his sister arrives. He asks what was going on. That was a dream, and if he was okay. He says it's there. There was no need to worry. By the way, what happened to his arm? Is nothing. He thinks he sprained it while he was working. I had to be more careful. Well, since it was nothing, Hesh can go back to bed, since Hesh arrived late yesterday. Okay, no need to worry about that. She can sleep well. The protagonist is silent. He now removes the bandage from his hand, looking at what was there. His hand soon turns into a golem's hand. And what happened yesterday was not a dream. It actually worked and played out the same way as the game. Does he know anything about this? The protagonist takes out his cell phone and tries to call his friend, but the number called was turned off or outside the coverage area. He lost signal again. And you've had a lot going on since the monsters appeared and only discovered later that the mobile network had never gone down. Soon after, we see the city being destroyed again and the monsters screaming thousands of times. A cell phone was broken, and to begin with, let's look at the protagonist. Yes, now no one will come to that abandoned building, and at a time like this. For example, what are the similarities and differences between that game and real life? First, it was time to find out how much his body had changed. Maybe he has other abilities too. Besides his transformed right arm, maybe it's because of the mood, but the whole body seems to be full of energy. What if it's just a pillar? He looks at that pillar head on. Even his hand wouldn't break it. Soon, he throws a punch, but nothing happens. It just starts to hurt a lot, and it seems like nothing has changed for now. But it's strange. He's sure he felt something. Was it just the strength of the other arm that increased? He looks for a place where he could jump. So, he tries to jump, but ends up not being able to. Not speed either. His running is normal. Is there resistance? Not much seems to have changed. His aim is still horrible. But in the protagonist's work, they ask what happened next. He arrives very injured. He was working out a little, and the result of the experiment was that he didn't turn into a superhuman who was bitten by a super spider. In the game, when obtaining the power of golems, if you level up, you gain much more strength and resistance points. The level concept has not been implemented. It simply does not feel due to the rate of development. Slow anyway, the only reliable weapon he has at the moment is his right hand, so he needs to check again. First thing at night, if possible, he would have to hunt again with just his right hand. He tries to hunt the golems again, and another one appears in front of him. The protagonist had already defeated him a little, so he falls to the ground and dies. The result of the experiment. At that moment, he thought he was going to die. It's very difficult to hunt with just your right hand, and he's lucky enough to know how they move, thanks to the game, but it's not like he can't defeat them. The problem is that it takes a long time to achieve it. He thinks he needs to train his own body more. Nothing in this life has been easy since that day, except when he was sleeping, eating, or working. He spent all day analyzing the game and practicing the moves. He knew he would master the moves. It would be worth it, but he didn't realize it at the time. But the experience was accumulating in his body, and after a month, he was already able to defeat the golems alone. He asks if he should stop for today. He can't just be one-on-one. He needs to start practicing fighting several monsters at the same time. One of them appears right behind the protagonist, but he was different. He was golden, and he notices this, even though he is very tired. The protagonist realized that wasn't just any goal. The stones that make up his body are different from those of others. A brilliant gold, no matter what the oil should be, high-purity gold. This was a treasure golem. Recently, the number of people who call themselves residents has increased greatly, and it has been discovered that among these strange creatures, called golems, a variation of the species called the treasure golem has emerged, and their bodies are made up of metals worth many millions or even billions. His sister gets angry because the protagonist was watching a lot of the newspaper and wasn't doing anything else. He doesn't even stop to eat, but the zone continues. That's why some people are invading the danger zones to hunt these monsters. And what are these people thinking? It's not worth risking your life for money. They call themselves residents, and his sister asks the protagonist, what does he think of this? It's something he wouldn't do, something like that. If just one of them is worth millions, then you think it's worth the risk. Going back to the present time, the protagonist sees it differently with the golden golem, and seeing it now in person, it is very easy to differentiate them by their colors. He thinks he could still fight a little, but he was very tired. But just one golem shouldn't be a problem. He begins to have his determination and says that everything is okay. It was time to go all out against this monster. The protagonist starts running forward. The golem attacks in the same way as the others. He dodges and then punches him in the face. Then, without giving any room for another attack, he immediately throws the golem against the wall, which ends up creating an explosion. It was as expected. Even though it was a treasure golem, it moved like the others. If he concentrates, he could win that fight. The golem stands up. The protagonist soon jumps at him, but he dodges, jumping into the air and trying to counterattack the protagonist, who also jumps into the air. Soon, without giving an opening for an attack, the golem immediately attacks the protagonist, but ends up not hitting. This creates a determination that makes him jump on top of the golem and rather dodge its attack by following closely behind. In the midst of all this, the protagonist prepares for an attack, saying that this would be the case. At that moment, he is interrupted. While he tries to launch the attack, another golem appears, punching the protagonist and throwing him into the wall. He immediately says it hurts, and another one arrived. He forgot he was in a danger zone, and damn, he never fought more than one at a time. Is his chance of victory almost zero? It would be better to run away. Yes, but he doesn't want to miss this opportunity, if it's for millions. He quickly remembers when he was talking to his sister, saying that only one of them is worth millions, so he thinks it's worth the risk. The protagonist wanted determination, and it was time to go for it. Treasure golems are rare, and there are many competitions among miners. He was very lucky and couldn't miss this chance. Now he just needs to defeat one, and it's not like he hasn't already been through this in the game. The two golems try to attack the protagonist, but he dodges. First, he has to keep his distance and pay attention to their attack pattern. As soon as he dodges the first attack, the other one will attack right away. They won't leave the opportunity to retaliate, and he needs to wait for a chance to counterattack. He only has one chance, and he needs to hit the weak point directly. One of the golems attacks the protagonist. He dodges and realizes it was time for the counterattack. He goes to counterattack while dodging, but his back stops in the middle of the golem's attack that comes from above, and this ends up hitting the ground with everything, hitting the protagonist in the head and making him fall hard. He was losing a lot of blood. His body was weak. He needed to escape, but he couldn't die like this. He can't do anything. Another person approaches the protagonist in the middle of this and destroys the golem that was trying to kill the protagonist with just one punch. His white hair was recognizable. The protagonist is scared. The other golem tries to attack him, but he dodges. He jumps on top and makes a final attack. He couldn't believe what he saw at that moment. Before losing consciousness, that guy says that it's a good thing he managed to come back, and now it was time to take him to the hospital. It seemed like everything was a dream. When he woke up the next day in the hospital, he only remembered his sister's crying and tantrum face as she talked about what he was thinking and thought he had lost. He almost had a heart attack and one of the backpacks he had never seen before, and what it was, whoever saved it asked the protagonist to hand it over. There was gold inside that backpack, and it was supposed to be used to pay for the hospital. Was that serious? Who was that guy? Inside one of the houses, there was a girl who was playing a fighting game, saying that she was very bad. She only knew how to use that and what she was playing. Then she gets scared of the person who appears right behind her and says he was just doing other things. So, the person who had a military outfit says to Shin Ah-rin, she's having fun because she was busting her ass outside. Oh, and it was just Shin Yunha. She's calling you crazy. She just called you, but she meant Annai. But wait, she didn't come back from work too early. Something happened in the restricted area. She was talking about it. I don't even remember. And then we went back a little in time. One person asks what the problem was. They are too good, and these monsters have no chance. They just wanted to help the people, and they could take care of it better than the military. Good for him, but they are not allowed to be here. Mercy, young people today are very annoying. She may be a beauty, but she is very bad. These shits are very abused. They think that they also have nothing to do, and as if she wasn't on duty. The other one says that it's fine, but many people lose their jobs after the disaster. They must be trying to survive in their own way. But even so, the restricted zone is prohibited. They wanted to be arrested at that moment, honestly. There are so many stupid people trying to break the block. It must be the fate of karma acting on her. She soon squeezes her head, even more so. The girl apologizes, but it must be nice to sit and play with the air conditioning. She found someone working hard outside. She just took a break, and they are both on the city's disaster management committee, and she even gets special treatment. Are you serious? I was working too. She looks very seriously at the girl and talks about, seriously, she must have discovered something then about those guys. Quickly, you get up and say that it was obvious and let me show something elsewhere. She says that she hasn't reported it to superiors yet. And what was that? They were the fragments, the monsters. One of them is a normal fragment, and the other still has a part of the skin tissue still attached. And could she try to destroy them both? And why would she find out at that moment? And the first one is right, the normal fragment. She hits it with everything and asks if it was supposed to be that weak and can't believe she destroyed the rock. And now it's gone, but as you can see, it's just a normal rock. The composition, hardness, and even in the city are the same as a common rock. Now it was time to try another. She asks if there is a difference, and first, just try to break it. She will take advantage and take out the hate, but she won't try to break it. At that moment, it is interrupted with the girl breaking everything, telling the animal to die. But when it hits everything on the table, an extreme noise happens, and smoke comes out. But soon after they observe that nothing happened. She says her brother went numb. And why didn't anything happen to that fragment? Nothing. She had just broken it. But as you can see, anyway, it is much more resistant than the others. It's because? It's still not sure, but this is because of this atmosphere of the tissue created by the monster's skin. The skin has never seen this type of material before, but when they are all alive, these rocks seem to be like their skin. However, when they are fragmented, they become something between dust and gas. If it is not preserved like these, they dissipate in a few minutes in the atmosphere. So, the stone became harder because of that organic matter. I would find that hard to believe. Well, she's not inventing anything. She just did some experiments. And what kind of experiments? She extracts the substance and places a normal stone. Serious? and then the substance evaporated, but before it was completely evaporated, it can confirm that the hardness and even in the city of the stone increases significantly. She gets serious about this kind of situation and asks if she should be surprised by this and asks to see it again. It's not bad. It's not a big deal. Well, that's interesting. Do you know how it works? If I had known, I would have spoken out already. And is it? She apologizes, and then there is some way to make the stones harder, and that's it. And have you tested it on other materials, like living beings? Of course, yes. She tested it in different dosages, ingestion methods, etc., and has already tested it on 74 rats, but they all die. She gets scared, then asks if it's very heavy and could it be some kind of poison, toxin. It seems so, but you still need to do some testing. It's a shame. I think it could give superpowers or something. And do you want to test it? You're crazy. You have to be really crazy to test this substance. Dangerous, natural selection does not allow it to multiply, and you know what? There are crazy people for everything. Maybe that guy is out there. And she talks about the protagonist. The protagonist at this moment was defeating a golden golem. He hadn't wasted any time since that day and had already managed to hunt down 4 golden golems, but that was only because he was never careless again. Because he still can't fight at that guy's level. And he's sure he also had the powers and the game hasn't even launched yet, so he shouldn't know about these monsters. He can only have some connection with Jinho. Otherwise, how did he discover the secret power? The protagonist takes one of the golem's gold fragments, and perhaps there are already several people with this type of power. This number will only grow in the future. Soon after, we return to the scientist who was analyzing that situation. She thinks about what she should do. Then we went back to the soldier who was sleeping and his cell phone was ringing. She asks what happened, so she asks the girl to go to the lab quickly and urgently. And what time is it? She ignores this and says it was time to hurry and urgently. The girl approaches and asks what she did at that moment, and then they look up at the table that something was happening. They get scared, and then she says that something happened. What was that? That rat with a substance stuck in its body. And please, he won't stay long. It was time to let him in. They still haven't found the boy inside. It was an old man who was talking about his son being in the restricted zone. He must still be there. So, it was time to let them look for them, even though they would like to let her in. However, there must still be monsters inside, and there is a risk of the second disaster. I couldn't let her in. But the lady begs, as she came from the other side of the country, and at least let us have a look. The other one comes there, says, I'm sorry, because they would start the search for him as quickly as possible, and no matter what happens, they would continue looking for him until they can bring him back to you. So please, it was just to trust the militancy and wait a little longer. And always when you see people like her, it ends up with a girl. And why? Because she wants to put an end to that situation as quickly as possible. It is difficult to say whether the situation is improving, as he has to fight for his life on the battlefield every day. They don't have enough troops. Minerals and thieves are heading towards the area. Despite all the problems, superiors only care about their reputations. Meanwhile, they are not receiving the resources, reinforcements, or support they need. The girl says that he is all grumpy, and if he can find time to think about something, he thinks about doing his own work first. And in that time, he would just like the Avengers to be on their side. And why the Avengers? Are you going to say out of nowhere that you're a Marvel fan? And it wasn't that. To be honest, it's worth thinking about if these types of monsters exist. So who's to say that these superheroes can't exist too? If he had the chance to get superpowers, he would go for it no matter what. She asks him. And well, as long as the method isn't to set himself up, he would probably go ahead. And of course, he would. What was that? We soon return to the scientist. At dawn, the military girl asks what she did, and she was looking at the glass box where the monster suddenly came to mind. If transplanting the fragment into himself would end up improving the skin tissue inside a living organism, he was wondering what would happen to, and what would be the result of that experiment. And with the change in shape, she also observed the improvement in the monster's physical abilities. The shape that changes what it would be like if exact. She had to research further to get details of what a golem would be like. The military girl asks, and that's what they call her. She asks what happened. A transmission arrived. It seems that the body of the golem has appeared again, completely destroyed. They observe it, and what do you mean? Every day seems new, interesting, and whoever is doing all this anyway is good for the military. Were they the mining? It was impossible. The ores would not capture a non-profit golem. And if this happened, even if it was once or twice, they would still consider it an accident. But someone is doing it on purpose. Someone is doing it. He doesn't know why, but he has been hunting golems every day. Someone, the protagonist. So we move on to him, where it's been months since he started hunting, and he's already managed to recover all the money he lost in that fraud. Spending all that money will give him peace of mind for about 5 years, knowing that 5 years of manual labor would only be equivalent to some yellow stones, and one is a little dull. Well, to be honest, he should be grateful for this situation, so he jumps over the railing at night and has a way to win a hell of a lot of money. The military girl was lying on her bed and an unknown golem hunter. Soon she remembers to ask the scientists if she didn't tell anyone anything. She says no, so it was time to keep it a secret between them. And why? It was time to let them know after they investigated. This power is a bit too much. It is not yet known if it has any side effects, so it would only cause confusion if they leave everyone in the loop. She may be right, but if there happens to be someone with that power, as she said before, and it could only be a mere concern, but this golem hunter has the same power. So she soon leaves at night and goes to the people who were on guard. They ask if she didn't just leave. Did she end up forgetting something? She was just going to take a look for a moment. So there's no need to record it for the record. It says it's understood. Soon after, we jump to the protagonist, who was hiding from the military. It's very suspicious. There are several patrols today. Maybe he'd better go back. But she appears right behind the protagonist and asks him to put his hands on his head. Otherwise, she'll shoot. Judging by her behavior and appearance, she probably wouldn't have to ask for his password. Now he had to put his hands on his head and turn around very slowly. From the conclusion that he has no companion, he does not appear to be a miner, so he's a thief. He wants to loot the monsters or something. The protagonist takes advantage of the opportunity to run away. So she asks him to stay still, and if she catches him, he will be dead. But she was left panting as the protagonist ran. He soon had nowhere left for him to go. He had to put his hands on his head and towards her. Then he entered a building and was cornered. He was really stupid, but there's nothing he can do now. But he notices and soon asks her to be careful. And soon he will appear. At that moment, she dodges, and he appears out of nowhere. It was a bad situation, but there are no choices. The entrance was blocked, and she couldn't escape. He is also too narrow and unstable to fight, and because of her, you'll have to hide your abilities. You could use it as a sacrifice. But she tells him that she would try to distract him, and when she sees an opening, he should run away alone. If he doesn't want to die in a place like that, he soon notices the wound on her back. So the protagonist sees that the golem starts to advance. Without thinking twice, he picks her up. And now that things are like this, he has no choice, so he jumps off the building. She gets scared and starts screaming, asking him if he's crazy and what he was doing. He then grabs the wall of the building and starts going down more slowly. So after going down, the two arrive on the ground. And what did he just do at that moment? He puts his hands over her eyes and says there might be more of them nearby. So she better get out of there and please forget what she saw, because he just saved her life, didn't he? Then he hopes to never meet again. He starts to run, but she asks him to wait. But it was too late. He already ran. And what she just saw at that moment, not even she knew. She gave the first aid she could. She thanks him, but she's not a doctor. You know, it's better to go to the hospital and be treated there. But she does not go to the hospital because of some injuries. So why doesn't she go inside the danger zone without the equipment? Has she lost sight of the danger? I think this doctor should stop asking if she doesn't want to die now, but I'm glad she escaped that. How did you manage to escape? She remembers that the protagonist asked her to forget what she saw, so she says that one of the Avengers saved her. So, she doesn't know what to say and thinks she has finally gone crazy for good. Well, she asks to forget about it and be quiet. The protagonist comes home and his sister says, "Welcome," and goes to play that game again. Right after you get home, don't you think you're addicted to it? He says no way. In fact, he is very addicted. Entering and leaving the danger zone became more difficult after they tightened security. Then he will start training in the game again. The things you could train are endless, like movement, attack patterns in each frame, or anything like that. But having to repeat all the actions for several hours is boring, and very boring. He said it was in beta, so he could search the entire first map, which will only have one type of mob. Looking at the amount of data, it seems like there are several regions with different types of them, but they are all locked. And that guy should work more on the game before handing it over to the protagonist. Soon he receives an update, and then an update. But no online game is just an unreleased beta version. And did he do this to the protagonist? Would it be a mistake, an update out of nowhere? And should I really think more about the idea that this game could have a reality? The protagonist's update wanted a wave across the entire city, and soon the update was over. It was time to see what changed. Well, there doesn't seem to be any major changes. Well, it was time to upgrade. Those who say this are the miners who were inside the danger zone recently. The military is more on top of the people. And he also seems to see fewer monsters around and thinks it was time to leave early in these times. What are the other options you have to get money? It was just time to take a look around, because look at those treasure golems. We soon jump to the protagonist, who was playing and realizes that that golem was really different. There was a blue stone on his back. He only has this jewel. He has never seen this kind of person before. He was going to try to capture it. It has the same attack pattern as the other golems. But the protagonist, when he goes to attack, hits him squarely and ends up killing him. What was going on isn't much different from the others. But wait. He asks if he would like to release the blue seal. What message is this? At that moment, the miners were also trying to do the same thing, and so they ask if he will falter at a time like this, because I couldn't get it out of there, and I had to keep quiet because it's more difficult than it seems. Soon the military appeared and asked what they were doing. It was time to go and get it removed, as the military arrived, and all they had to do was stop rushing, as it was almost there. The soldier tells the guy to stay still and not do what he was doing, but he ends up withdrawing, and so the soldiers approached. But they wanted very strong pressure. The blue seal begins to fly and create several dark tentacles, grab some giant rocks, and thus begin to dominate the entire city. They say that this was not possible. Another monster appears, a guard dog in the protagonist's game. This watchdog also appeared for the miners and the military. They were scared. And then, one of them snatches the gun from the soldiers, saying that if he's not going to shoot, it should be passed on to him. But he holds the gun and asks if he was crazy and shouldn't take it out. Obviously, the shots had no effect. And that ends up killing one of them, who ends up catching one of the soldiers and simply looking different, opening his mouth and swallowing one of them. In the newspapers, it appears here, the new giant monster broke through the military security zone and reached the city center, causing chaos and destruction, where hundreds of civilians live. The monsters continue to destroy everything in their path. And the government, in response, is tracking their movements as they analyze to designate new danger zones. During this time, they will ask all civilians in these danger zones to immediately evacuate to the nearest emergency shelters. And to think that this watchdog would materialize, is it the protagonist's fault? Because the account updated the game, it updated reality at the same time. All these stones are because of his stupid decision. Soon, the sister puts her hand on the protagonist's shoulder. She knows the news is shocking, but first they must evacuate, as the neighborhood is in the danger zone too. And yes, she was right. It was time to grab the essentials and evacuate. This is not the time to blame yourself for things you are not yet sure of. It seems that leaving that monster alone could end up putting his sister in danger as well. That was reason enough for him to take responsibility and put an end to that monster. In the government, they are very disappointed with him because of the incident. Captain, and they assigned her to that mission because they had high expectations for her leadership ability. Yet she failed to put an end to problems like the little thieves and the miners, and still let a disaster happen. The current situation was created by a certain miner, right? And he thinks putting a woman in charge was a mistake. And well, he's going to be very clear. From today onwards, she will be relieved of all duties as infantry commander, and there will be a court-martial to decide what will happen to her. Until she will be confined to her own residence. She says that they didn't provide any support before this disaster. However, now they are all acting very quickly. They asked what that was. She says she understands, as she also believes she is to blame for the current situation. I would humbly accept any punishment they give. But ultimately, she will take responsibility for that disaster. They look at her and say that they didn't expect her attitude to be that of a person ready to easily accept punishment. I hope she doesn't do anything stupid, but they don't think they need to worry. What can a capture do alone other than mourn the deaths of its men? There's nothing she can do. She looks at the photo of the people who died, and in those moments, she wishes they had the Avengers on their side. She holds her hands, and what was that? The doctor asks what that fragment said. It was time to transplant it into her body. And why are you saying this all of a sudden? They can't. They have no idea what could happen to the human body. It will probably work out. She says this, remembering the protagonist, and knows because she witnessed something like this. And why are you so sure of nothing? She's going to say that yesterday, to keep it between us, and it's not because she feels guilty about what happened, something like that. Not feeling guilty, but it's something similar. Several men died on the mission under her orders. This is not about guilt, but as their commander, it is responsibility. Therefore, in the danger zone, a monster was destroying everything nearby. The protagonist was right above them, and in the game, when the battle begins, the battlefield is created automatically to prevent him from leaving that place. One of the things he wants, like levels, for example, are materialized there. That was a bad game. The soldier appears right behind the protagonist and asks if he is the type who thinks the real world is a game. And he, despite his appearance, has a very manic side like her sister. And how did she get there? He ended up following the protagonist. He was looking for that monster when he ended up seeing him. So why is he there exactly? He can't be thinking about fighting that monster. What if he is? But don't even think about it. She doesn't even want to see the other civilians being killed. That's what I'd like to say, but he's just a random person. He is someone who has powers. Anyway, I wish he would lend some of his own strength. How about fighting that thing together? It's going to be dangerous, but promise me you'll at least be able to keep him alive. A team with her? Why should I do this? Would I come out to get in the way of the protagonist? She soon demonstrates the arm she gained and asks if he is sure about it. He asks how she did that. They can talk about it later. So, how about making a duo? He hoped there were other people with skills, but he didn't show up too quickly, to be honest. This ends up surprising him, so much so that it took a while to think about it. But yes, better in pairs than alone. Okay, it was time to do it together. It was a great decision. Apparently, he's not a bad person. And just let him say one thing. He'd better make sure she stays alive too, because he'll hate having her as a ghost bothering him. Then they look at the monsters from above. She says she could leave it, as she will do her best, right? Why don't we put it to rest? She asks herself. Wait, where does she think she's going? At that moment, why? Nor do you think she will struggle with this without having a plan in mind. A plan, they need one. They have these powers, so they should just jump on it. Then the plan begins to be created. She wants to go to the ground with everything in front of the monster. And then a ball of fire appears in her hand, and she immediately inhales with all her might to punch him in the head. Simply killing the animal is what she was thinking, but she didn't even test the skills after she managed to test them. She doesn't have time for this. She ran here right after she won because something was wrong. She has a very strong power, and why didn't she fly instead of running? He was also very dumb at first. But listen, he got the golem's powers, but the physical ability is still the same, except for the arm. It's better to have her in mind there than her arms. No, it's no one different. He asked if it was serious and was saying that he was an ordinary person. It hadn't flown while charging. It doesn't matter for now. It was just a matter of going up, but as well, that's what she meant. But she's saying that she has no chance of winning if she goes head to head. So what are you going to do to fight him? Luckily, he has a weak point. She asked where this weak point is. It's that horn. If they destroy him, he will die as quickly as possible. Is it that easy? And do you think it will be easy? Because would he leave the weak spot so exposed? How are you going to get the horn off that huge head? They could use tanks or guns, but already saw his movements. Do you think those things would be able to hit you so easily? Wow, he's being such a soft ass right now, so smart. What would they do? Well, he has a plan. Meanwhile, the monster was destroying everything around the city, and the protagonist prepares himself. Soon, the monster, after destroying everything, the protagonist jumps in front of it and dodges the attack. This way, he will spend all his stamina alone, forgetting from him. You need to find a way to counterattack. When the monster tries to attack from above, the protagonist jumps back. Right, he managed to get close to him. He just needs to punch him in the gut. But the monster, he jumps up and clings to the wall. It's a joke. The laws of physics are a joke to that monster. The monster soon jumps on top of the protagonist, trying to swallow him, to deceive him directly. An explosion happens, and after the smoke dissipates, a punch was given to that monster's jaw by the protagonist. He only managed to get it right once, and he wished it had been somewhere other than the rock. And did he suffer any damage? Could his life be visible like in the game? Now, at this moment, the protagonist dodges one of his attacks. Then, the monster jumps on the protagonist, and he starts running. That monster really despises the laws of physics, but what can he do? The woman was simply looking up. And that guy is going to be fine. He has a plan. And what plan was that? At first glance, it looks like he's moving without any direction. But if you look closely, he has 8 attack patterns. And he will tell you what they are now. It's kind of difficult, so just memorize this pattern that you are going to say. How does he know all this? This pattern is the best chance they have of taking him down. But first, you will spend on it alone and force this standard. Meanwhile, she waits. He said that above, but he's just running away. That fight is more difficult than the protagonist expected. And he thought he was already used to the pressure of fighting. But with his size in real life, it's very different. It is impossible to compare it with normal golems. At that moment, unlike the game, he would probably die with just one attack. And he can't even think about forcing a standard attack from him. Just dodging is already too difficult, and he has no choice. I don't know how to expect him to carry out any of those attacks. He soon falls to the ground, and just like that, the monster jumps at him with all his might. The protagonist prepares. He had raised his head. The horn was shining. When does the horn on your head begin to glow? This means he will use a fire attack. She asks if he can do it. And is it a dragon? Pay attention to what you are going to say. When he raises his head, he will stay still for about 3 seconds to form his flames. He will use his best skill to force a fire attack in that area. So, she should wait in a good place where she can get a good view of her own head and not miss the chance. When she sees the attack, she goes ahead without hesitating at all and attacks the horn. She jumped on top of the monster and then prepared to destroy the horn. Then it falls hard on his head, which explodes. There, its flames have a great range, and it is not impossible to avoid its attack, but it will be difficult to dodge, as it takes a long time to react. So, if possible, before he disappears, the flames try to break the horn with a single blow. She throws a punch, but damn, it didn't really work. She was putting all her strength into it. Soon, the monster begins to prepare, and if he fails, he will unleash the flames with all his might. The protagonist realizes this, and so he had said that he could die. Soon after the flames were welded, the protagonist realizes that he won't be able to dodge, but waits. This is not like throwing flames in a normal combustion. The flames would spread everywhere, but these flames will not reach your own body. Now, if he leaves, the flames end up wrapping themselves around the protagonist, and that creates a huge flame. She starts trying to destroy the crystal, stopping it, and soon after hitting it a few times, she realizes that it doesn't do any damage. The monster grabs her by the hand and throws her on the floor, which hurts a lot. She starts to say that it hurts. Then the monster screams at her with all his might, and then he tries to destroy her, but she escapes because the protagonist saved her. And how did he make it up? It was just time to keep quiet and run. Now was not the time to ask questions. The monster starts screaming at them, and they go get it. It was supposed to run faster, but it doesn't bother me. She just hurt her back, and after screaming for a moment, they got it to escape. And how is her back? She's all screwed up. And how is he? He was almost caught in the flames. But it was very close even though he couldn't break the horn. He thought he could at least get into his own head, and when he was there, everything would work out somehow. And now I'm going to repeat the same plan. No, that plan is very dangerous. It was time to think of something else. This is the same monster from the game. But unlike an artificial intelligence game, it was adapting the situation. And the proof of this is that you cannot force him to use an attack according to the distance from the protagonist. The same strategy will not work if he is able to learn from his mistakes. He has a second plan, and how he would have fought if he had been alone when that thing started attacking non-stop. There would be a chance for him to lower his head for a moment, and that's when he would have a chance to break the horn. That's what he did in the game, but it's the fight now. Did you notice that his arm's reach is too great, and he doesn't lower his arm? Had enough. It wouldn't work. In fact, she thinks it could work. It was time to try that plan. He doesn't have any better ideas, and he really thinks it would work. Soon, they go after the animal, and it was time to stop chasing it, and they have already decided. But it was time to be careful, as they don't know that monsters attack patterns. He said he paid attention to the fight earlier and memorized the 4th of the 8 patterns, including the fire attack and the other 4. She just smiles at the protagonist and says, right, it was time to go for it. And where does she think she's going now? There's no going back. He saw the people and already. The monster disappears, jumping at them with all his might, and then he falls to the ground, looking up, trying to spit flames. He's about to use that attack. Pay attention. He turned his head to the side, and it's not the same attack as before. The fire will spread everywhere. It was time to climb something. He lets go, and soon after, they're climbing onto something. How can he attack so quickly? The protagonist, moving away, realizes that the monster saw her nearby and tries to attack with everything she has, but she lets go and falls to the ground, and then he advances his hand towards her, but she again dodges. The monster, without mercy, attacks again, but this was the chance. There's a chance he'll lower his head on this third blow. But the protagonist realized and it was not to run from there. He soon uses a side attack, but if he tries, it won't work. He gets up too quickly, and that's because he wants to dodge and attack. What happens if he gets hit? He has to try to block. These goblin abilities are destructive. Not only is it supposed to make your fists stronger, it also strengthens all the muscles in your arm. So don't you think you could block it at least once? It was time to use that moment to attack. And there is no other situation. But he will stay on defense as he knows the attack patterns, but don't overdo it. Focus on dodging. That was the deal, but even so, she was the one defending herself at that moment. The sequence of attacks can cause instantaneous movement, and you'll have to use everything you have. She, of course, is attacked but ends up trying to dodge. This ends up making her body hurt a lot, but she soon puts her foot to the side and has to wait. She manages to block that, but she didn't expect it to work. That was really stupid, but it was really good, and I couldn't miss this opportunity. The protagonist soon jumps on top of the monster to try to attack with everything he can. He then explodes on top of that crystal, which ends up breaking.